There's something uniquely comforting about a coffee shop late at night, isn't there? The quiet hum of the espresso machine, the soft background music, the rich aroma of roasted beans. It feels like a safe haven, a little bubble of warmth against the dark world outside. But sometimes, that bubble can pop. Tonight, grab your favorite late-night brew, get cozy, and listen to 3 true horror stories that all happened in the seemingly innocent setting of a coffee shop. Our first story comes from a barista named Chloe, who used to work the closing shift at a small, independent cafe in a quiet suburban town. The shop was located in an old building, the kind with creaky floors and a history that everyone joked about, but no one really knew. One Tuesday night, Chloe was cleaning up, getting ready to close. It was just her and one customer, a man who had been sitting in the corner for hours, just nursing a single black coffee. He hadn't said a word, just stared intently at his laptop. As Chloe wiped down the last table, she noticed the man was packing up. He walked to the counter, and instead of leaving, he just stood there, smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, unnatural, and his eyes were completely fixed on her. She asked if he needed anything else, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't answer. He just slowly lifted his hand and pointed a long, bony finger at the old, dusty cuckoo clock on the wall behind her. It hadn't worked in years. Just as he pointed, the little wooden bird shot out, cuckooing once, twice, 3 times. The man's smile widened even more, and then he just turned and walked out the door into the night. Chloe was so terrified she locked the door and called her manager to come sit with her until her shift ended. The clock never made another sound, and she never saw that man again. The second story is from a college student, Mark, who frequented a 24-hour coffee shop near his campus to pull all-nighters. He was a regular, so he knew all the late-night staff and the other students who used the place as a study hall. One night, around 2 a.m., he was deep into writing an essay when a woman sat down at the table directly across from him. She was dressed in vintage clothing, like something out of the 1950s, and had a very pale complexion. He thought it was just a student with a unique fashion sense. He went to get a refill, and when he came back, she was gone. But on her table was an old, leather-bound diary. Thinking she'd be back for it, he left it there. An hour passed, and she didn't return. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened it. The first page had a date from 50 years prior. The handwriting was elegant, and it described the author's excitement about meeting her boyfriend for coffee at that very shop. As he flipped through the pages, the entries got darker. The writer spoke of arguments, jealousy, and fear. The final entry was chilling. It just said, "He's here. I don't think he's going to let me leave." Mark felt a cold dread wash over him. He looked at the date of the final entry. It was that exact day, 50 years ago. He quickly closed the book, left it on the table, packed his things, and ran out of there. He studies at the library now. Our final story is perhaps the most unsettling. It was shared by a woman named Sarah, who was meeting a friend for coffee in a bustling downtown cafe. The place was packed, and they managed to get a small table near the window. As they chatted, Sarah noticed a man sitting alone a few tables away. He was drawing in a sketchbook. But what was strange was that he kept glancing up at her and her friend, then quickly looking back down to draw. At first, she thought nothing of it. Maybe he was just an artist sketching patrons. But his stare felt ... intense. After about 30 minutes, the man closed his sketchbook, stood up, and walked toward their table. Sarah's heart started pounding. He stopped right beside her, leaned in, and whispered, "You should be more careful about who can hear your conversation." He then placed his sketchbook on their table, opened to the last page, and walked out of the coffee shop. On the page was a shockingly detailed drawing of Sarah and her friend at the table. But that wasn't the scary part. Around the drawing, written in frantic script, were direct quotes from their private conversation, things they had whispered. Details about their personal lives that no one could have possibly overheard in the loud, crowded room. They had been talking about Sarah's recent breakup and some very private details. How did he know? How did he hear? They paid their bill and left immediately, constantly looking over their shoulders. Sarah said the experience taught her that you never, ever know who is listening. So the next time you're enjoying a quiet moment in your favorite cafe, take a look around. You might just be a character in someone else's story, and it might not be a very pleasant one. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, and maybe check your locks twice tonight. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more late-night stories. See you next time. This story happened a couple of years ago when I was pulling an all-nighter for my final exams. My apartment was too distracting, so I decided to head to this 24-hour coffee shop that had just opened up downtown. It was called The Daily Grind. Pretty standard name, but the place itself was actually quite nice. It had this cozy vintage vibe with dim lighting, comfy armchairs, and the smell of freshly ground coffee beans hanging in the air. Perfect for studying, or so I thought. I got there around 11 p.m. The place was almost empty. Just a few other night owls scattered around, lost in their own worlds of laptops and textbooks. I ordered a large black coffee, found a secluded corner booth, and got to work. The first couple of hours were super productive. The caffeine was kicking in, and I was in the zone. Around 2 a.m., things started to get a little weird. Most of the other customers had left, and now it was just me, one other student across the room, and the barista. The barista was this tall, slender guy who hadn't said a word the entire time I was there. He just moved silently behind the counter, polishing glasses and wiping surfaces with this unnerving, methodical slowness. He never looked up, not once. I tried to ignore it and focus on my notes, but a strange feeling started to creep over me. It felt like the air in the shop was getting thicker, heavier. The low hum of the espresso machine, which had been a comforting background noise, now sounded like a low growl. I glanced over at the other student. He was packing up his bag in a hurry, his face pale. He practically sprinted out the door without looking back. Now it was just me and the silent barista. I told myself I was just tired and paranoid. I needed more coffee. I walked up to the counter, my footsteps echoing in the unnervingly quiet room. "Can I get a refill, please?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The barista finally looked up from his polishing, and his eyes. They were completely black, not dark brown, not dilated pupils. Just two solid, glossy orbs of black. There was no white, no iris, nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze. He didn't say a thing. He just gave this slow, small smile that didn't reach his eyes. The smile was wrong. It was too wide, stretching his lips in a way that looked unnatural, almost painful. He reached under the counter and pulled out a coffee pot. But instead of pouring it into my mug, he started pouring the steaming black liquid directly onto the countertop. It sizzled and pooled, dripping onto the floor, but he just kept pouring, his black eyes fixed on mine. That awful smile never leaving his face. I didn't wait for him to finish. I abandoned everything: my laptop, my textbooks, my half-full cup. I just turned and ran. I burst out of the coffee shop and didn't stop running until I was blocks away, gasping for air under a streetlight. My mind was racing. What did I just see? Was it a hallucination from sleep deprivation and too much caffeine? The next day, after finally getting some sleep, I convinced myself it must have been a dream. A very vivid, terrifying stress dream. But curiosity got the better of me. That afternoon, I walked back to the coffee shop. I had to know. But when I got to the address, there was no Daily Grind. In its place was an old, abandoned storefront, covered in dust and grime. A faded for-lease sign was taped to the inside of the window. It looked like it had been vacant for years. I asked the owner of the shop next door about the 24-hour coffee place. He just looked at me, confused, and said that building has been empty for as long as he can remember. So what was it? Where was I? I still don't have an answer, but I can tell you this. I never ever study in a coffee shop late at night anymore. Thanks for watching, and if you have a creepy story of your own, let me know in the comments. I'll see you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Grab your favorite mug, maybe add a little extra sugar today, because we are diving into a story that proves, sometimes, the best remedy for a long night isn't caffeine. It's just getting out of the building. We're talking about a true coffee shop horror story, specifically one centered around the graveyard shift. This story comes from a viewer named Mark, who worked at a small, independently owned coffee joint called The Grindstone. Now, The Grindstone wasn't known for being trendy. The Grindstone was housed in a very old building. We're talking early 1900s, brick and mortar, with a basement that was sealed off years ago due to flooding. The main floor was cozy, but the storage room in the back, where they kept the extra beans and supplies, was perpetually freezing and always smelled musty. Mark said every time he walked in there, the hairs on his arms would stand up. He just figured it was bad ventilation. One Tuesday night, around 2:45 a.m., things were especially slow. The only customer was an elderly woman knitting quietly in the corner, nursing a single cup of black coffee. Mark was restocking the syrups, trying to kill time, when he heard it. A distinct, sharp tapping sound coming from the wall separating the storage room from the kitchen prep area. Tap, tap, tap. He stopped what he was doing and listened. Nothing. Old pipes. He mumbled to himself, picking up the vanilla syrup bottle. Soon as his hand touched the bottle, the tapping started again, louder this time, almost rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, it sounded like someone was trying to knock on the wall from the other side. The side of the sealed basement. Mark tried to ignore it. He walked over to the old woman, Madame Celeste, to ask if she needed a refill. She smiled sweetly, shook her head, and pointed toward the back corner of the cafe, near the storage door. She didn't say anything, just pointed, and her expression was unnervingly neutral. Mark turned around, and that's when he saw it. The storage room door, which he knew he had latched securely shut just 10 minutes prior, was slightly ajar. Maybe an inch or two. He could just see the edge of the darkness inside. Now, Mark wasn't a coward, but he had watched enough horror movies to know that investigating a slightly open door in a creepy old moss building at 3 a.m. is a terrible idea. He swallowed hard, grabbed the heavy metal stirring rod used for mixing large batches of iced tea, and slowly approached the door. He pushed the door open completely, flipping on the harsh overhead fluorescent light. The room was empty. No one. Nothing was spilled, nothing was moved. The boxes of coffee filters were stacked neatly, exactly as he'd left them. He even checked behind the sacks of espresso beans. Complete silence. Thinking he was just tired, he secured the latch and went back to the counter. He looked over at Madame Celeste to see if she was watching. She was knitting again, but her eyes were fixed on the storage room door. And then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper, yet totally clear in the silent cafe. "He doesn't like being locked in, dearie," she said, without looking up from her needles. "He gets lonely down there." Mark's blood went cold. He walked back to the counter, heart pounding. Madame Celeste finally looked up. Wouldn't leave his precious beans. It was louder, more frantic, and then it turned into a scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across cement. Mark said that the noise wasn't what truly terrified him. It was the smell. Who was now slowly packing up her knitting bag. a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She stood up, placed a $50 bill on the table for her 1 cup of black coffee, and said, "Time to go home, dearie." The shift is almost over, but not for him. As she walked toward the exit, the scraping under the floor grew intense. Mark didn't wait. He grabbed his keys, threw on his jacket, and bolted out the front door, leaving the lights on and the cash register open. He never went back to the grindstone, not even for his last paycheck. The next morning, the owner called him, furious about the open shop. Mark just told him he quit. And when the owner pressed him about why, Mark simply said, "Check the basement." So, tell me, would you ever pull an all-nighter at a place like the Grindstone? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more true accounts of workplace horror, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Stay safe out there, and I'll catch you in the next video.